You are listening to Bedtime Dreamy Tales. Share and subscribe our channel. Story title: The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. Once upon a time, in a kingdom filled with towering castles and lush forests, there lived a king and queen who were loved by their people. They ruled with wisdom and kindness, yet despite their riches and power, there was one thing they desired more than anything in the world: a child. For years, they tried to have a baby, but their hopes were met with heartbreak and sorrow. The entire kingdom shared in their grief, and the castle, once full of laughter and joy, grew silent and somber. One day, when all hope seemed lost, a miracle occurred. The queen, after years of waiting, discovered she was going to have a child. The news spread like wildfire across the land, and the kingdom erupted in celebration. The streets were filled with music, and people danced with joy, for they knew that their beloved rulers would finally have an heir. When the time came, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The king was so overjoyed that he declared a grand christening feast, the likes of which had never been seen before. He invited not only the nobility of the land, but also all the fairies that resided in the kingdom. There were 7 fairies in total, each with the power to bestow a special gift upon the newborn princess. The day of the christening arrived, and the palace glittered with gold and jewels. The banquet tables were laden with the finest dishes, and each fairy was presented with a golden plate, a goblet encrusted with diamonds, and a seat of honor. However, just as the feast was about to begin, an unexpected guest arrived, an ancient fairy who had not been seen in the kingdom for over 50 years. She had been on a long journey to distant lands and had not received the invitation. The king, ever gracious, ordered that a place be set for her, but alas, there was no more golden dish to offer. Instead, she was given a plate made of common delf, which, though humble, was still treated with respect. The elderly fairy, feeling slighted and overlooked, muttered under her breath, casting dark looks at the other fairies who sat in splendor. One of the younger fairies, wise beyond her years, sensed the old fairy's anger and feared that she might seek revenge. To protect the baby princess, the young fairy hid behind a tapestry, waiting for her turn to speak last. She knew that if anything bad were to happen, she might be able to counteract it. The 6 other fairies stepped forward, one by one, to bestow their gifts upon the princess. They gave her beauty, grace, kindness, intelligence, the gift of song, and the gift of dance. The little princess was destined to be the most perfect being in all the land. Then, it was the old fairy's turn. She stepped forward, her eyes cold and filled with spite. "So, you think you can forget me?" she hissed. "I shall give her a gift too." With a wicked smile, she pointed her gnarled finger at the crib. "When she turns 15, she shall prick her finger on a spindle and die." The room fell silent, and the queen gasped, clutching her daughter to her chest. The guests were frozen in horror, and even the king, who was known for his bravery, felt fear creep into his heart. Just as the old fairy was about to leave, the young fairy who had been hiding stepped forward. "Do not fear, your majesties," she said gently. "I cannot undo the curse, but I can soften it. The princess will indeed prick her finger, but she will not die. Instead, she will fall into a deep sleep that will last 100 years. At the end of that time, she will be awakened by the kiss of a prince who loves her." The relief in the room was palpable, and though the curse was not entirely lifted, there was hope. The king, determined to protect his daughter, issued a decree that all spinning wheels and spindles were to be destroyed throughout the kingdom. Anyone found with one would face the severest punishment. And so, the years passed, and the princess grew into the most beautiful and accomplished young woman in the kingdom, just as the fairies had promised. Yet, the shadow of the curse lingered, a dark cloud over the happiness of the royal family. As the princess approached her 15th birthday, the kingdom prepared for a grand celebration. The king and queen, though cautious, could not help but be swept up in the joy of the occasion. The princess was adored by all, her beauty and kindness winning the hearts of everyone she met. She was also curious and adventurous, often exploring the vast castle grounds and the forests beyond. One day, as her birthday drew near, the king and queen had to attend to matters of state in a distant part of the kingdom. They left their daughter in the care of the castle staff, trusting that she would be safe within the walls of their grand home. But the princess, full of youthful energy, decided to explore parts of the castle she had never seen before. She wandered through long-forgotten corridors and up winding staircases until she reached an old, dusty tower. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. In the corner, hunched over a spinning wheel, was an old woman. Her hair was grey and her hands were gnarled with age, but her eyes were kind. "What are you doing, good old woman?" asked the princess, her curiosity piqued. "I am spinning, my dear child," the old woman replied, not looking up from her work. "Spinning?" The princess had never seen a spinning wheel before, as all of them had been destroyed years ago. "How fascinating! May I try?" The old woman smiled and nodded, handing the spindle to the princess. But the moment the princess touched it, the curse took hold. She pricked her finger on the sharp point, and as the blood welled up, she felt her strength leave her. She collapsed to the floor, her eyes closing as she slipped into a deep, enchanted sleep. The old woman cried out for help, and soon the castle was in chaos. The king and queen were summoned, and when they arrived, they found their beloved daughter lying still and silent, as if she were dead. But her chest rose and fell with the soft rhythm of sleep, and her cheeks still held their rosy hue. Realizing that the curse had come to pass, the king and queen were heartbroken. They had done everything they could to protect her, but fate had intervened. With heavy hearts, they laid her on a bed of the finest silk and adorned her with flowers, placing her in the grandest room of the castle. Then, recalling the words of the young fairy, they decided to wait. They would not disturb her sleep, nor would they allow anyone else to do so. They issued a decree that the castle was to be sealed off and no one was to enter. But even as the king and queen wept for their daughter, the kind fairy who had altered the curse was watching. From her distant kingdom, she flew to the castle in a chariot of fire drawn by dragons. Arriving at the castle, she found the king and queen in despair. "Your Majesties," she said, "I see that the curse has taken hold, but fear not, for I shall ensure that your daughter is not alone when she awakens." With a wave of her wand, the fairy cast a powerful spell over the entire castle. One by one, everyone in the castle fell into a deep sleep. The courtiers, the servants, the animals, even the flames in the hearth froze in time. The castle itself was encased in a thick, thorny forest that grew up in an instant, hiding it from the world. The king and queen, the only ones left awake, kissed their daughter one last time and left the castle, knowing they would never see her again. They returned to their duties, hoping that one day a prince would come to awaken their sleeping daughter. The years passed and the kingdom changed. New kings came to power, and the memory of the sleeping princess faded into legend. The castle, hidden by the enchanted forest, was forgotten by all but a few. As the decades turned into a century, the story of the beautiful princess who slept for 100 years became nothing more than a fairy tale told to children at bedtime. But the enchanted forest remained, impenetrable and mysterious. Many brave souls tried to enter it, but the thorns were too thick and the forest too dark. It was as if the woods themselves were guarding a secret, and they let no one pass. One day, exactly 100 years after the princess fell asleep, a young prince set out on a hunting expedition. He was a noble and courageous young man, known for his bravery and his kind heart. As he rode through the forest with his companions, he noticed a strange and ancient wood, its trees twisted and gnarled, unlike anything he had ever seen before. "What lies beyond those trees?" the prince asked one of the older men in his party. The man shook his head. "No one knows, Your Highness. Some say it is a haunted wood, others that it hides a great treasure. But there are also stories of a beautiful princess who sleeps there, waiting for a prince to awaken her." Intrigued, the prince decided to explore the forest himself. Despite the warnings of his companions, he dismounted his horse and approached the edge of the woods. As he drew nearer, the thick branches and thorny vines parted, creating a path for him. The prince was amazed, but he was also determined to discover the truth. He pressed on, moving deeper into the forest. The air grew cooler and the light dimmer, but the path remained clear. He soon found himself standing before a tall, ancient castle, its towers rising above the trees. The castle was silent, as if it had been asleep for 100 years. Undeterred, the prince entered the castle. The courtyard was filled with soldiers and courtiers, all frozen in time, their eyes closed in slumber. He passed through grand halls and stately chambers where ladies and gentlemen of the court sat motionless, as if caught in a moment of rest. Finally, the prince reached the heart of the castle. There, in a grand bedchamber, he saw the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, lying on an embroidered bed, her golden hair spread out like a halo. She looked as if she were merely asleep, but the prince knew that she had been waiting for him for 100 years. Overcome with emotion, the prince knelt beside her. He could not resist leaning in to kiss her softly on the lips. The moment his lips touched hers, the spell was broken. The princess's eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at the prince with a smile. "Is it you, my prince?" she whispered. "I have waited so long for you." The prince, who had never known such love, felt his heart swell with joy. "Yes, my princess," he replied. "I am here, and I will never leave you." As the prince and princess gazed into each other's eyes, the magic that had held the castle in slumber for a century began to fade. The courtiers and servants awoke, stretching and yawning as if they had merely taken a short nap. The musicians, still holding their instruments, began to play a joyful melody, and the cooks resumed their work in the kitchen, preparing a grand feast as if no time had passed. The little dog Puffy, who had slept at the foot of the princess's bed, leaped up, barking happily and wagging his tail. He ran around the room, delighted to see his mistress awake. The princess laughed and petted him, feeling as if she had just awoken from a long, wonderful dream. The prince helped the princess to her feet, and they walked hand in hand to the grand hall where a banquet had been prepared. Though the fashion of her dress was 100 years old, the prince thought she had never looked more beautiful. He was captivated by her grace and charm, just as she was enchanted by his bravery and kindness. As they entered the hall, the courtiers, now fully awake, burst into applause. They were overjoyed to see their princess alive and well, and even more so to see her with the handsome young prince who had saved her. The feast was the grandest that the castle had ever seen, with music, dancing, and laughter echoing through the halls. That very evening, the prince and princess were married in a ceremony filled with love and happiness. The kind fairy who had altered the curse appeared once more, blessing the union with a final gift, the gift of eternal love and happiness. The prince and princess, though separated by 100 years, were now united forever. After the wedding, the prince and princess decided to leave the ancient castle and return to the princess's ancestral kingdom. As they stepped outside, the enchanted wood that had hidden the castle for so long began to disappear. The trees and thorns vanished, the ancient stones crumbled into dust, and the castle itself faded into the earth, leaving no trace of the magical events that had taken place. The prince and princess returned to the kingdom, where they were welcomed with open arms. The people, though they had grown much cleverer over the past century, were still in awe of the love story that had spanned 100 years. The princess's true identity was never revealed, for no one would have believed the tale, but she and the prince were loved and respected by all. The years that followed were filled with joy and prosperity. The prince and princess ruled wisely, their love growing stronger with each passing day. Though they never saw the fairies again, they often thought of them with gratitude. And so, the story of the Sleeping Beauty in the Wood came to a close, with the prince and princess living happily ever after. As for the castle and the enchanted wood, they were never seen again by mortal eyes. Some say that the fairies took them to a distant land where they still stand, hidden from the world. Others believe that they were simply a dream, a magical tale to be told and retold to children for generations to come. And so, the legend of the Sleeping Beauty in the Wood lived on, a story of love, bravery, and the power of a true heart that transcends time itself. The prince and princess, now a part of that legend, remained in the hearts of the people, their love and inspiration for all who heard their tale. If you like this story, please give this video a like. For more stories, go to bedtimedreamytales.com. See you in the next story.